Hi, today we will be presenting our Comparing Independence and Nation Building assignment. Our team is composed by Jean-Paul Deselier, Sebastián Rosas, Sania Wasi, Nicolás Aidan, and Maria Susana Castellanos. We will start this presentation with an overview of Karl Marx and his Communist Manifesto. We will then analyze the sources and revolution of Zedong, Cedar, Nehru, and Fanon. And after that, we will explore how open these authors were toward foreign citizens. Finally, we will explore our views. Before answering our question, we wanted to explain the metaphor behind Marx's opinion about peasant. It was the 18th of March of 1871 when the Paris Commune, which was the first working-class government in the world that believed in self-managed socialism, took the power of the French capital. The peasants supported this movement, but only for 61 days, when they decided to turn their back on it and join the French government. To overthrow it, Karl Marx referred to these peasants as a sack of potatoes, due to their attitude towards the short-lived Paris Commune. Now, let's explore a little bit on who is Karl Marx. Marx was a German philosopher, author, social theorist, and economist that was born in 1817. And wrote about his theories in capitalism, socialism, and communism. He rejected capitalism despite being inspired by Adam Smith and stressed that capitalism will destroy itself due to the rise of inequality and the tendency of competition to drop corporate profits to zero. He condemned the free market and instead suggested that every major corporation had to be owned by the state, or in other words, democratize the means of production and turn the working class into their owners.
Now we are going to explain why the authors of the readings drew on the ideas of Karl Marx. Mao Zedong drew on the ideas of Karl Marx by completely rejecting capitalism in his country and establishing what he called a new democracy, to democratize the means of production, expropriate the land of the rich, and gift it to the peasants, in that way establishing communism in China. Negritude, explained by Leopold Sedar as the complex of values Africans were deprived from when they were colonized, referred to Marx's ideals because they unite a social class with a pride for their race, something communism suggests the working force to do to overthrow the wealthy. Jawaharlal Nehru also had Marxist ideas because he wanted to take everyone into consideration when thinking about planning the future of his nation. He wanted individuals to become a community and then contribute to the peaceful transformation of India. Finally, Frantz Fanon's motives call back to Karl Marx when he mentions the violent disintegration of social classes in order to raise the poor and bury the rich. He doesn't mention economics, but he does follow Marx's ideas on community when he calls for unity against the ruling class.
Now we're going to go to section 3, that is titled The View on Culture. For this section, we're going to talk about which leaders were more open to having foreigners in their new nations against those that thought that it was better to just keep it native. So the way that we're going to do this is that we design this spectrum. So we're going to go from one that we thought Prime Minister Nehru was more open to foreigners, and then the last that was going to be Dr. Fanon, that we think he was more towards the idea of having more indigenous cultures and natives being only in Algeria. So starting off with Prime Minister Nehru, he embraced foreign influence as the most he recognized that the aid and collaboration from other nations will be extremely important when building India after their independence, because India was going to face a moment when there was going to be a big power vacuum once the British left. So the way that we did this analysis was getting different quotes from the text as evidence for the way that these leaders were thinking at the moment. So here we're going to see, for example, planning with sexual and labor of peaceful cooperation. Then India, a very important part of Prime Minister Nehru was he was saying that in India the standards were so terribly low that it was of vital importance to have international aid and collaboration to come in to raise their standards and see what an organized society would look like in the long term, so that India could become a new nation state without the British rule. Next, we have Senegalese President Leopold Sedar. President Sedar talked about how assimilation will be impossible because Senegalese people will never be able to be truly French because of the color of their skin. Here, in his example of negritude, he made it seem like people needed to celebrate who they were without the need to adapt 100% to Western values. However, it's important to say that in the long run, he saw Senegal being more of a part of a French Commonwealth type of thing, because he thought that the weak African states were not enough to be a completely independent nation. So he always held on to that concept that their negritude was an addition and a complement to their Western European values. So from here, we talked about how in his speech, he talks about how paradoxically it was the French, when they imposed the policies of assimilation, that make him see how their negritude and their African values were extremely important for their life, since they could not strip their black skins or root out their black souls, meaning that they should be proud of who they are instead of trying to wash themselves out in order to become more European. And last but not least, talking about how negritude expresses itself not as an opposition to European values, but instead it was a complement to them, making a Senegalese person half French, half African. Moving on, we have Mao Zedong, who talked about how foreigners were accepted as long as it was convenient for Chinese culture and the new Chinese socialist regime that they were going to have, that it went aligned with the values of the Communist Party. Also, it can be that China did not have an extreme rejection towards foreigners because, as Mao said in one of his speeches, he recognized that China was still very backwards, therefore that they did need not a complete rejection of capitalism, because it was important for them to fertilize its industry to move from an agricultural background to an industrialized country that could compete in the world market. So here we talk about that it opposes imperialism, and because it upholds the dignity and independence of these nations, meaning that capitalism was okay as long as it fell until those communist values, those core communist values. Then also he made an example with a metaphor saying that when you eat food, you are not going to take the food as it is. You're going to take it, you're going to eat it, you're going to digest it, and then you think what is actually nutritious for your body. Meaning the same thing of China. You can take cultures and values from other places, but you need to think critically and then add it to yourself. However, obviously, he will say this in the concept of communism, saying that they will take anything from other cultures that align with the core values of communism. And last but not least, this republic does not take over other forms of capitalist production, but because the economy was still very backwards, they still needed that outlook on global expansion and the need for trade, so they could not close the Chinese country. They could not close China completely, even though they still did practice a lot of protectionism measures even till today. Last, we have Dr. Fano in Nigeria, who had the most radical view on colonization and its consequences. As he said, the only outcome will be violence. In his view, Western values are made to make feel natives inferior, and that the only way to unite the country has to be through violence to reach independence, and that after independence is reached, natives will be more aware of taking care of their long-awaited freedom, since it was paid with blood and violence. He was also somebody that thought that at a level of, here going to the quotes, at a level of individuals, violence is a cleansing force, meaning that violence was the only way to achieve independence. And also he was talking about how any attempt to have independence would always come along that price in blood and violence. He also said that it could be said that because he was a psychiatrist and his main job was treating people that were tortured or people that were torturing others, that view on violence was so embedded into him that it really changed his view on what decolonization and that process would be in the long term. Since if you are exposed to those type of horrors every single day, you won't be able to keep going with the same view that you have of the world. So he saw Western values as a sample of violence every single day, and for Africa to be truly free, they needed to break apart from that. But however, that will only come with more violence until the point that they reach peace. And then because of all that suffering, all that process, was that Africans were truly going to embrace their independence and actually take care of it in the long run.
Finally, we'll talk about the ways these thinkers and arguments influence our view in contemporary politics.
I am a strong believer that the past defines the future. In this ongoing changing world, the past has an important role with the way of thinking, molding today's perspective of politics and the way of thinking of the public. Past thinkers propose solutions and a special way of thinking, suitable and solving problems for that era in specific. We live in a changing world where arguments and conflicts rise over generations. These arguments are used and taken into consideration as pillars to form a way of thinking that suits the current problems of the contemporary era. Over the years, globalization and free trade enabled the world to be more connected, exchanging not only goods and services, but culture, knowledge, and open-mindedness as well. Countries now need the help of others to develop, have a competitive advantage, where contemporary politics now depend on these factors. Past arguments don't integrate races and cultural differences, but rather define the effects it will have on the future. In Peru, the current president, Pedro Castillo, is a true believer in socialism and being self-sustainable with the country's resources, like Mao stated in the text. Mr. Castillo is the first socialist president the countries have faced where every public announcement reflects past thinkers like Karl Marx, as he believes it to be the right way to govern a country. He believes that Peru doesn't need the help of anyone to develop, others just steal from the richest resources Peru offers. Mr. Castillo is a close-minded governor where for him poverty is caused by rich supremacy and discrimination, where the rich should give their extra house to the poor and the poor should have more privileges like the rich, for example, not having to pay taxes. As a socialist speech, many people believed in him and believed in this old-fashioned mindset. As a result of old-fashioned thinking in this modern era, more than 70% of the country is against him, and the currency devalued around 20%. We live in a modern democratic society where women empowerment should be instilled in every society, where race shouldn't be a reason of discrimination or embarrassment. Like I said, past thinkers stated their arguments to address the problems of that era. The same arguments cannot be applied to this ongoing changing world, where new problems arise every time requiring different approaches to be taken. Peru with Pedro Castillo is an example of how past thinkers and their arguments influence contemporary politics. Castillo is just the last one of an ongoing trend in South America where there is danger in the exploitation of the feeling of oppression, which has been seen with AMLO in 2018 in Mexico and Maduro in 2013 in Venezuela. This can be seen in today's rising leftist populism in the region. It has become easier to find a mutual reason to hate rather than proposing new plans. Not everyone will have the attention span to listen to your tributary reform, but everyone will understand if you scream against one race or an invisible enemy. Inflating passion has allowed the rise of different political leaders with their personal agendas, but I think that becomes especially dangerous when those ideals of change are based around personal resentment.
Nowadays, the ways of thinking of global leaders have changed drastically, which has unified the world in more than one way. Time has completely changed the viewpoints of society. Actions that used to be forbidden and looked down upon as disgrace are now the same actions that are applauded by the world. The open-mindedness towards accepting all different cultures and opinions that were oppressed by leaders in the past are the exact qualities that society nowadays look for in a leader for their countries. The flaws of the past is what has brought hopes for the future of contemporary politics.
Thank you.